Hi, Alicia.
Hi.
I'm Tara from DTI. We're here to talk about the pelvic floor with Alicia Willoughby, who is a physical therapist here in San Rafael, California. She primarily works with moms-to-be and moms who have just recently had babies. And we really are interested in finding out what is the pelvic floor, first and foremost, and how do we take care of it? So what information can we start today with, Alicia?
Okay, so what is the pelvic floor is a good place to start. The pelvic floor is basically a group of muscles that line the inner part of the pelvis. So here's a picture. So this picture is looking down into the pelvic bowl. You can see the spine at the top there. And then here is the pubic bone. Then there's the tailbone. So all of this muscle here is the pelvic floor. It's a group of muscles, and if you're looking down at the pelvic floor, it looks like a hammock. It attaches to the inside of the pelvic bowl there, all of the bones, and then you can see the vaginal opening and the rectal opening that it goes around as well. Its function is beyond just holding up or holding back urine and gas and stool, which is, I think, the main things that people know the pelvic floor to be about. But the other important function of the pelvic floor is that it stabilizes the pelvis. So from a functional point of view, if we think about our core muscles' job is to stabilize the pelvis and the spine, the pelvic floor is that first layer of the core that stabilizes all of your pelvic bones together.
Great, thanks. So as someone who works with pregnant and birthing women and postpartum women, and someone who trains doulas, I'm really interested to know what are the changes that take place, specifically with the pelvic floor before, during, and after pregnancy.
So the pelvic floor before pregnancy hopefully is doing the functions that I mentioned, although I have seen women who have not been pregnant and had babies and have pelvic floor issues. So it can still weaken just from being sedentary and not using the muscles. But specifically in pregnancy, the pelvic floor has an added job of to hold the baby up and in. So because of that weight, the pelvic floor is literally lifting weight all day long as a pregnant woman is walking around. And so that can cause the pelvic floor to weaken. Some women will experience incontinence during pregnancy, which is not normal. That means the pelvic floor is not doing its job. And then specifically postpartum, if a woman has a vaginal birth, you can imagine what the pelvic floor goes through, being stretched and possibly cut and possibly torn. And then even if a woman has a cesarean, just because of the load of being pregnant and the pelvic floor working to hold the baby up, a woman still may have issues with the pelvic floor postpartum. So then postpartum, the job of that pelvic floor is to regain its control to hold back urine and gas and stool and to stabilize the pelvis. And the biggest problem that I see postpartum is that a woman can no longer get their brain to activate their pelvic floor. So when I ask them to do a pelvic floor lift with a lot of cueing, they send the brain sends a signal down and nothing happens. So the brain cannot reconnect. So there's a disconnect there in the neurological control, which is the most important thing to regain postpartum.
I have a question about that. Do you think that women lose that because of the pregnancy and the labor, or is it something that some of us are just never even connected to in the first place?
Good question. I think a little bit of both. I think if I see someone postpartum, I might not have seen them during their pregnancy, so I don't know what they were like before, but I can say I've seen plenty of women who have not had kids that have a disconnect, so it might be disconnected to begin with. But the act of pregnancy and birth, it is such a huge load on the pelvic floor that causes the brain to stop activating the pelvic floor out of a protective mechanism to allow it to heal. It's just like if you hurt your knee, your brain would shut down your muscles around your knee to stop it from moving to allow it to heal. So that disconnect is actually a reflex that happens that's normal, but in most women, it won't return naturally unless they give it some attention. And I can say personally, I had good pelvic floor control going into my births, but then postpartum after my first baby, I knew what I was supposed to do, and I started trying to activate my pelvic floor, and nothing happened. And it took a couple days of trying to make it to work again, and then it finally started to respond.
Great, thank you. So next, I'm curious, what kinds of questions do you get most often when women come in postpartum? What's the most common question you get?
Let me specify that when I see women postpartum, I'm not an internal pelvic floor therapist, so I'm not doing internal work. So a woman is coming to see me postpartum because they either have pain somewhere in their back, in their neck, in their hips, in their pelvis, and or they have weakness that they know about. So they have incontinence, or they know their abdominals are weak or separated, or there's something going on there. So I would say unless somebody's having incontinence, they usually don't even ask me about their pelvic floor, because women are so unaware of the importance of its functioning. So I would say that they don't ask as much because they don't know. But if they have incontinence, then they're coming in specifically with questions about how to make it better.
Okay. And then my last question for you is, if you were to say to all of us one thing about our pelvic floor that we probably don't know that we need to know, what would it be?
I would say for postpartum women or mothers, the biggest thing I wish all women would know is that incontinence, leaking urine, is not normal. And, yes, in the first couple months postpartum, it's normal, but beyond that, it is not normal. And I can't believe how many women I meet who don't know that it's not normal to be leaking while running, that they can't run after their kids, they can't return to running or soccer because they're leaking. So that's the really big thing that I wish all women knew, is that it's not normal to be leaking urine.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. It's so important for us working with that population to be able to know what the normal range is and when to refer. So I really thank you for that. I wanted to also just tell everyone we're going to be meeting with Alicia a few times over the next couple of weeks. And Alicia, can you tell us what we're going to talk about next time?
Yeah, next time I'd love to add on this next layer of our core, which pelvic floor is number one, and the next thing is our transversus abdominis, so our deepest abdominal layer, and talk about its function, what happens in pregnancy, what happens postpartum, and that will also cover abdominal separations.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alicia.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.